This is the Self-Employed Mum podcast, the raw, honest truths of what it takes to be a mum and an entrepreneur. Running a business while raising small humans is an entirely different ballgame, and if you, like me, are in the thick of it right now, this podcast is for you. I'm your host, Rhiannon Louden, mom of two, proud entrepreneur, and CEO of two small businesses. And my guests, women who are juggling all the plates, building businesses while raising the next generation. Thanks for tuning in, and don't forget to like, follow, and spread the word to help keep this podcast going. Now on to today's episode. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Self-Employed Mum podcast. Today I am joined by the lovely Susie, who is founder of the Maternity Pledge, mum of two, and a self-proclaimed lover of trash television. Hello, Susie.
Hi, Rhiannon. Yes, I do love my trashy TV.
We thought we'd start with a little fun fact like that today. Some of what we're going to talk about is probably quite heavy and very relatable for virtually everybody listening to the podcast. And rather than me try and ramble on and explain what Susie does, I am going to let her tell us a little bit more about Maternity Pledge and tell us a little bit about how all of this came about as well.
Oh, okay. I mean, probably a long story, but I'll try and cut it down. So the Maternity Pledge, in its essence, is all about training employers, well, leaders and managers, I guess, to sort of understand and recognize the huge transition that it is when you become a parent. And what that means is in terms of your identity, your sort of perinatal mental health, really, and then how you're going to adapt back into work. And that's what the Maternity Pledge does. As part of that, I also have what I call Matrescence packs. So I can get on to what Matrescence really means in a second. But they are, again, essentially antenatal packs to try and help people plan better for having a baby, but in terms of their mental health and in terms of looking after them. Because ultimately, if you look after yourself, then baby's going to be absolutely fine. And we need to start reframing the narrative a little bit around childcare and having children and motherhood, in that looking after yourself is a good thing to do and possibly the most important thing to do, because everything else will follow through from it. If you burn yourself out by desperately trying to just look after your baby and do the right thing, then that's not going to help anybody. So there's a whole sort of narrative that needs changing. But as usual, when I speak to people, I start jumping around to different tangents. So I'll let you reel me back in to where we
No, I
belong.
think that's the perfect introduction. And I think you're right. Whenever we think about motherhood, you know, there's a million books out there about how to be pregnant well and how to raise a baby well and all of these things. But there's so little focus, at least in the UK, and I think probably in most of the sort of Western world, on the well-being of you as the mother specifically. And I think, you know, what you said rings so true. If you take care of yourself, everything else will fall into place. But, you know, a lot of us believe that that's selfish because we've been told that, or that, you know, that's less important. And we do tend to put ourselves at the bottom of the priority list. So, you know, I think what you're doing is so important. And it's a great topic to bring this stuff to light and to talk about what a big adjustment it is going from, you know, from just being you as Susie to like Susie as a mom, and then as a mom a second time, and everything that goes along with that when you're also juggling a relationship and a career and all of these other sort of multifaceted aspects of our lives.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's just such a huge shift. I mean, the whole reason this all came about is because I found it such a hard shift. So I had my first son in 2017, and it was a difficult time. I'm pretty sure I had postnatal depression after he was born. Honestly, I was never completely like officially diagnosed. My health visitors thought that was the case. They couldn't get me on any peer support stuff. And I just kind of muddled through that first year, really, just kind of figured it out as I went along. And then when I had my second son, that would have been in 2020, so that ended up being in lockdown. And we just moved to a new city. So I was really, really conscious. I was like, do you know what? I had depression first time. We're in a new city. We're in lockdown. I really need to be on watch for it. And then it didn't happen, but I still felt a lot of the same feelings I'd had first time, which was this real loss of identity and loss of sense of self, and not feeling like I was good enough, and feeling really conflicting emotions towards my son. that I'd thought were all part of having depression. I mean, there were other depression symptoms. I was just crying into cake every day. That was going on too. But those are the depressive symptoms didn't happen second time around, but the other ones did. And that's when I started thinking that there must be something else going on. So I started digging around, and that's when I found the term matrescence. And this term, I kid you not, it's 51 years old. It was created by the anthropologist that came up with the word doula. So I think most people know what a doula is, but they haven't heard of matrescence. And matrescence really simply means that transition to motherhood. And it's really underexplored. Not that much is known about it. It's starting to change because there's more research into it now because it's been recognized for what it is. But it was only really revived in 2008 by a psychologist over in Columbia University. And she basically kind of has put it into the developmental phase of maternal mental health. And she likens it to adolescence. So whenever I explains to people, I say matrescence like adolescence, and people get it because they go, okay, so when I was a teenager, my body changed, my hormones went a bit mad. My relationship with my peers and my parents or my friends were shifting about. I was trying to figure out who I was. My dress sense would be one thing one day. I'd listen to this music the next day. I would care about this person the next time. And you were doing all that, and you were doing all that over a span of years, and you were doing all that, allowed him to be really angsty and really moody, and everyone kind of let you get away with it because you're a teenager, right? And all of that is happening when you have a child, in that obviously your body is changing, your hormones absolutely going mental, your relationships really shift. Like your relationship with your partner definitely shifts because that dynamic changes it all, and it's very easy to get very resentful and to feel like your life has changed more than theirs, and that's a real change. Your relationship with your parents probably changes as well. You might look back to what did my childhood look like, and that makes you think differently about your parents. How you see the world is different, how you see the environment, how you see politics, and you just kind of have this loss of yourself because you've spent, in most cases the average age is 30 now to have a kid, right? And a lot of people are maybe even older than that. I know I certainly was. So you spent maybe 30 years being you, and then suddenly so much of that is stripped away. And especially if you spent 30 years being quite, perhaps maybe high achieving and confident and successful, good at your job, and then all of that is removed and you've got to do something new that there's no sort of rule book for, and you're figuring out your own way, and you feel really lost. And that is that transition to motherhood. And that is an element, that is matrescence, and there's lots of different manifestations of it, but that is really similar to adolescence. And your brain changes as well. They used to think your brain changed in adolescence, then you're an adult, that's it. But it changes. It changes when you're pregnant and have a child. Like baby brain is a real thing. But you think of it as just like, oh, absent-minded mums. Oh, aren't they silly? Isn't that funny? Oh, she just forgotten something again. Oh, honestly, Kimberly, you'd lose your head. It's all a bit like that, which is just so, it just makes me really mad. But it's like, no, your brain has physically changed, and the whole point it's changed is it's made you more responsive and flexible and efficient to be able to respond to your child. Like it is making sure that you can look after your child, and therefore it has to strip away some of the other stuff that might mean you forget somebody's name, or with the program you saw last night or something like that. So yeah, it's just a really real thing. And if you don't know about it and you're going through all these things and everyone's expecting you to be #blessed and like living your best life and being so grateful for everything and not allowed to feel any other emotion that's not pure happiness, then you can A, think there's something wrong with you, as I did, and B, just feel really sad that you're not having this amazing experience that you think you're meant to have as a new mum, because that's the story you've been sold time and time again. So this is just putting a realistic slant on what that transition to motherhood actually looks like, so that people have more perspective and can ideally have more support.
I think that's amazing. And I love how your sort of foray into this area really came so organically through your own experience. And I think that's why it's so obvious when you're talking that you're passionate about it. And I know I've heard you speak about it before, but I think you can really tell that it's something that's close to your heart. And that's clearly because you've had that experience. And the thing is, like, I think so many of us have had a similar experience. Not everybody maybe has PMDD or these different types of depression, but I think most of us, when we go through that transition, that matrescence, you're not prepared for it. You don't really know what it is. People don't talk about that. They talk about the lack of sleep, and they talk about, the physical recovery, but so few people talk about actually navigating that transition. And when you were talking about getting angry about the way that people kind of brush these things aside, it seems anything to do with like female health and hormones does just get brushed aside, and it's very much like, oh, you just deal with it. Like, we've all had to deal with it. It's not that big of a deal. But actually, you're right. Like, science has proven that your brain does change. This is a huge, like, think about the equivalent of, being pregnant for 9 months and then going through childbirth and then having a baby to care for. Like, we give people medals for running marathons, but we don't even get acknowledged for going through all of that. It's crazy when you think about it.
I know when you pull it apart logically, it just doesn't make sense. But again, it's all part of this sort of normalized narrative that I think it's about 82% of women are parents, by the end of their lifetime, they've become a parent. They've had it. Well, I think they've given birth. Of course, you can be a parent in a different way, but I think that's the actual stat for sort of giving birth. And there was, I mean, way back in 2004, I say way back, it's like 10 years ago, in 2014 feels like it was like yesterday to me. But yeah, like 10 years ago, there was a study in Australia of new parents. And what it concluded was that we need older parents to be more realistic with expectant and new parents about the realities of parenting, because there's overly optimistic expectations and then it drops right down when you kind of realize what it's actually like in the trenches. And that was 10 years ago, and I think it still really rings true now. And there's so much more talk about it now. Like, since I've been doing this, I've seen a real movement of people being a lot more honest and having lots of conversations about mental health. And because I'm just a big fat nerd, I've looked into lots of like little studies about various things to do with mental health and how we support parents and how we support mothers. And these studies are sort of out there in an academic sense, but not really within the mainstream narrative. So you still end up with this idea that it's like you said, oh, well, we've been doing this since the dawn of time. What are you complaining about? And that needs to change, basically, because that is not helpful to anyone. So what if you've been doing something to the dawn of time? It doesn't mean that that's the right way you should approach it. We need to be looking at it a bit differently. And that's why I think matrescence is so powerful. I think it is really a good key to kind of either unlocking perinatal mental health in terms of helping people that perhaps on the sort of lower end of the spectrum or sort of milder end of the spectrum to feel better, and destigmatizing people that perhaps then do have disorders and need additional help, that is something that they need to go and reach out for. But it's too normalized that everything's going to be fine, or people have done it before, so you just crack on. And it's so unhelpful, and makes me angry.
Well, and you're right. You do end up, if you are feeling that way, you do start thinking there's something wrong with you. I kind of have a similar experience to you in that, well, I also had my first daughter in 2017, and we were so excited for her to come. And then I really struggled with that transition into motherhood. And part of that was, I'm from Canada originally, and we'd only been living in Scotland for about 2 years when she was born. None of our friends in Scotland had children. Like, they were mostly childless by choice, or a few of them were yet to have children. I didn't know any other parents. My friends that did have kids were way back in Canada. And all of a sudden I had this baby. My husband had to go back to work after 2 weeks, and I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't have family support, and it just felt, it was awful. Like, I totally lost my sense of self. There was a huge confidence drop. And, looking back now, I think that was probably postnatal depression, a lot of what I was feeling, but it wasn't recognized at the time. And I definitely spent so much time in those kind of early months and maybe even years of motherhood thinking, was I not meant to be a mom if I feel this way? And, that's a horrible way to feel and a horrible thing to go through. And I do think you're right. It is getting better. People are having these conversations. There's more literature about these things. There's more studies being done, but there is still a real stigma where it's like you should just be happy that you were able to have a healthy child, and you're almost looked down upon for being honest sometimes, or it's that, well, what does that say about you if that's how you feel?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a few things that you said there that made me think. So one of the things when I spoke to lots of mums, the top word that comes up is failure. So they felt like a failure for lots of different reasons. And I think, I mean, I'm not quite sure when you'll put this out, but obviously last week the birth trauma inquiry stuff came out. So you're hearing these horrific stories of people that have gone through terrible things. And if you are starting your journey as a mother with that, but even if you don't have that, you can still feel like you failed at birth. Like I felt like I'd failed first time around because my son was 5 weeks early. So I felt like that was a failure. But one of the things that's cropped up time and time again with women that I've spoken to is the word failure. So they felt like a failure for childbirth, they felt like a failure for breastfeeding, they felt like a failure because they didn't feel like how they thought it would feel. And that's a really rubbish way to start motherhood if right from birth you're like, oh, I feel like a failure, I've done this wrong. And I think we saw that probably with the birth trauma inquiry, lots of awful stories coming out about that. And one of the problems that kind of perpetuates this is this idea of being a natural mother, which if you find it hard or you don't feel connected instantly or even over time, because it can take a long time, you feel like, oh, I wasn't meant to be a mother, or have I made the right decision, or I'm not a natural mother. And a lot of that, I talk about this with people when I do workshops and training and things, is I talk about the myth of the maternal instinct. So that has now been debunked. Maternal instinct is not an actual thing. There's a fantastic sort of author called Chelsea Connerboy who's got a book about this, and she says that the maternal instinct, it was basically made up by a bunch of men in the early 20th century who wanted well-off white women to have more children. So they kind of coined it as, it's a PR stunt, isn't it? Like this is what you're meant to do in life. This is your journey. You're meant to look after children. You instinctively know what to do with them. You should be a mother and all of that. But actually, what I said before is the brain changes. So it's your brain is picking up on the microest micro of cues. But then that also means that it's trial and error. And sometimes you get it wrong. And also sometimes it's an impossible decision. You're like, he's done a poo. Do I wake him? Do I just let him sleep? And then you make the wrong, and then you'd go, oh, God, I can't let him sleep in his poo. Fine, I'll do that. And then instantly it's like, oh, I made the wrong call here. I should have just let him sleep. Or the other way around, be like, I made the wrong decision here. Because what you don't know, I've never at any other point in my life been worried that somebody is too hot and too cold at the same time. Like that's mental. That is like mental. I don't understand how that can be, but that was an element of my thought process with less so my second. I think with the second, you're a bit more like, no, I can cover the practical stuff. That's fine. But it's such a confusing time, and this idea that you should be and have maternal instinct or be a natural mother, I think it really plays with how you then feel about yourself and about motherhood in general. And then when you add in the lack of social support, which also is a thing across loads of studies around depression, that lack of social support was one of the things that kept coming up in like every country, not just in the UK, like across the world. Lack of social support was one of the drivers of postnatal depression. And we live in a Western society. We live in our own homes as a sort of generalized 2.4 family. You maybe are working and now you're not working, you're on maternity leave, so you're not seeing people are having kids earlier, like you said, maybe you were the first, maybe you're the first of your friends to have kids. We were in London for our first child, so we weren't really near anyone. Even if they did have children, you're still sort of it's not like you're just around the corner. And all of those things, when you just add up one thing after the other, like it's really painting a bit of a perfect storm to make life hard. And therefore affect your mental health.
Yeah, and the lack of support thing is a really it's interesting that that's kind of across the board, because I always think it's like particularly bad here when I read, about how in France there's a lot of like extra physical care for mums after they have a baby, or one of my closest friends is from the Netherlands, and she was saying there they have like, it's almost like a sort of, it's a nurse, but she acts more as like a sort of nanny. And she comes into your home, I think it's for a couple of weeks after the baby is born, and she spends the day and she will clean, she will put laundry on, she will take rubbish out the back. Like, she's really there to support the family so that the family can just enjoy the baby instead of having to do all these extra things. And she will take the baby and give the mom a break to have a nap or whatever. And I was just thinking, man, imagine if that level of support was available, like even just in those early 2 weeks. But the mental health support, I mean, I think mental health is obviously there's a massive lack of support across the board. But it's very interesting to me that you look at something as huge as becoming a parent and bringing another life into the world, and there is nothing set up for mental health support until you hit a crisis level. And how many of those cases could be prevented if we actually looked at it in a more preventative way and work like you're doing, where you're actually educating people, and not just educating, mums to be themselves, but also the people around them, employers, leaders, like having everybody become more aware of this research and this knowledge, and a little bit more of a realistic picture of motherhood, rather than this sort of idealistic, like Instagrammable, perfect, as you say, hashtag blessed kind of mum life.
Yeah, and I think that's it. Like, we talk so much about the importance of early years for children, but that starts way back when, and that starts with the mother and the family that are around them. And you're right, there is so little support until you reach crisis point. And I'm not throwing that blame at the people that work at the NHS and this and the other. Like, it's just that how our system is set up, how the cuts have been made over the years, it's essentially decimated it. And I am like, my womb is closed. We are not having any more children. Like, we are done. But I do worry for the people that are pregnant or do want to have children soon, because it's something along the lines of 67% of maternity units are deemed unsafe. Like, can you imagine if you're pregnant now? And I apologize to anybody if you are, and please, if you are listening to this and you are, like, educate yourself. Look up birthrights.org, because they advocate for better birth and stuff like that. Like, really educate yourself, please. But if you are pregnant right now and your local hospital is one that's been deemed unsafe, and you're thinking, okay, so I've got to give birth in an unsafe hospital. Look, chances are it will be okay, but chances are it might not. And there might be an effect to me or to the baby. Or even if there's not, I'm going in with that level of anxiety that the care might not be there on the day because the staff are stretched, or the staff might not listen to me. Like that, we're in the Western world, we're in a developed country. Like, that should not be our reality in 2024. I find that really quite scary. And I know, obviously, again, there's been recommendations put in place to try and make that better, and hopefully that'll be the case. I've spoken with people that are a bit cynical about it, but we'll see. I don't work in that field, I don't know. But there's so much that could be done for preventative measures. And again, this is part of what I do with employers. I talk about social impact. So, what your social impact is on someone, and how that can help them, and how that can help them over the long term, and how many people that can help. When you're in employment and you're a leader or you're a manager, then your social impact can actually be huge. And when it comes to children in particular, but new parents in particular, when you have a child, that ripple effect of that on the child's life, the mother's life, the father's life, the families, the community, the economic impact, the sort of impact for the future, like, it's a huge ripple effect. And if you have got those points in place with, just an employer supporting the father or the mother through it, and giving them more support and giving them more opportunities, then that has a positive effect. And if we can find other things within the system and the service that we live in, then that can have a positive effect. And that's why I'm seeing so many women start up a business to do with parenting, childcare, mental health, physical health, postnatal, pregnancy yoga, postnatal yoga, fitness, all of that, because they've all been through it and gone, well, this is fucking rubbish, isn't it? Like, sorry to swear, but like, this isn't good enough. Okay, what can I do? Okay, I'm quite passionate about this, right? I'm just gonna crack on and set it up and do it myself. And I think you're seeing legions of women do that now. Um, because we need to. If we wouldn't, if we didn't, and we'd stay in our lane, stay in our jobs, being supported as we should. But yeah, we're not. So we're striking out on our own.
No, you're absolutely right. And I mean, even like my own shift, like, okay, this podcast is only a very small part of what I do. But even that, when I started the podcast, I was very much about like, I'm going to champion female entrepreneurs, like just as a whole. Obviously, that's a much bigger group. And for a long time, yeah, I guess over the years of my own experience, like having both girls and motherhood and everything, I think I always, as more time went on, I kind of saw my business going more in this field as you're talking about, more focused on helping women who are also mothers to sort of navigate that world along with growing a business. And I was hesitant to do it because I'm always worried about this whole thing of pitting like women with kids against women without kids. And that, I don't want to play any role in that. And quite a lot of my entrepreneur pals, they don't have children. But I think you're right. Like, but there is a need for this. It's sort of like the argument of like, well, why is there International Women's Day? Why is there not International Men's Day? And it's like, okay, well, the reason that I feel kind of positive about morphing my work more into that area is because there is so little support. And, not to pit women against each other, but let's be honest, if you are trying to build a business while also raising children, that is an added challenge that it brings so much into the picture about trying to find the right balance, about navigating, your children's schedules and school pickups and all of the added things that come with being a mother. You can't argue that that doesn't bring added challenges into the mix. And I think so much more support is needed. So you're right. You can totally see it's very obvious why so many women have sort of morphed their businesses in that direction. And I guess that is quite a positive thing in terms of like maybe the next generation of mums coming up into that and seeing that there is more support available. Even things like there's a couple of what are they called? Physiotherapists, but specifically for like women's health before and after having a baby, pre and postnatal. And I was thinking like that didn't exist unless you had a really serious problem, even when I had Charlotte, my oldest daughter. And now I'm seeing, there's a few just even local in Glasgow who are super active and super passionate personal trainers, as you say, who are focused more on mums like pre and postnatal. So many people have realized that there is a gap here and a real needed service. And so, I mean, I guess it's positive in that that's existing now. It's just unfortunate that it's taken until now, when obviously this has been a problem for as long as there have been mums.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And I think it's great, like you say, that there's more sort of female focused businesses and you are focusing on mums. And I agree with you. I don't want to pitch mums against people that aren't mums. And I think I can't speak for people that aren't mums and run a business. I don't know what your life looks like. And I'm sure there might be some sort of sense of like, maybe you don't feel like you're given the same leniences or you've talked about it in the same way or this and that. I don't know. But yeah, the fact is just we live in a patriarchal society, and I don't think that serves men or women. Like, in fairness, I don't think it does. I think it serves like the 1% of white men that are primarily in power. I think that's pretty much what it serves. But that means that it is, if anything happens at nursery, they call me. They don't call Robbie first, they call me. And that's fine. I work for myself, but he also works for himself.
Yeah.
And so we are a kind of family that have a lot of flexibility. And we have made those quite deliberate choices to do that. But he could equally go and do a lot of things that I do. And this isn't me bashing my husband here, like he doesn't, I do. And that's partly because I want to spend time with my children. So, I don't work full time because I still have my youngest who's not at school yet, and I still have him a couple of days a week, and I want to do that. But equally inside me, internalized, is my own expectation that that is what I do, because I'm a mum, and I've been, and Robbie will admit this as well, I am sort of the preferred parent, certainly for the 3-year-old. And I've been like the default parent all the way through. And it's been kind of my job, I guess, that's probably taken more of a hit than his. And I kind of think of us as being quite a relatively like modern, equal setup. But I don't know anyone really who's like properly equal. And there will be people out there, of course there will, but you know, who's a proper 50-50 thing. And I'm part of a really lovely community called Doing It for the Kids, which is all like freelancer parents. And I have noticed it sometimes when the father is a freelancer and the mother's obviously in a more 9 to 5 job, that they seem to get involved in more of the school pickups and stuff, because maybe it is just more about flexibility than what your gender is. But equally, obviously, it's hard to get that flexibility depending on the industry that you work in, and more women tend to work in education or retail, or hospitality, and those things don't always have the same level of flexibility, because if you're a teacher, you're a teacher. If you are working in retail, then you've got a sort of shift pattern to follow, and it's same with hospitality, with events and things like that. So yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm rambling. I'm not really sure what my point is here, but
I think, no, I think what you're trying to say is even in families where people feel that they have a supportive partner, and like gender stereotyping here, but yes, it does tend to be that the mum gets the calls first, the mum adjusts her schedule, the mum takes the bulk of a maternity leave, all of these things. Even in partnerships or marriages where people do feel like their other half kind of holds their weight. I'm the same as you. I don't know anybody who feels that it's completely equal. And I mean, in our case, my husband does work like an 8 to 5, he's a civil engineer, so everything is like his hours are billable. It's an old-fashioned sort of industry, and there isn't much flexibility. But we've definitely had arguments over it because, as you say, it's difficult not to feel resentful towards this other person who, from my perspective, just gets to, life just goes on as it needs to. Whereas I feel like my life is always disrupted and always planned around the kids. But on the other side of that, he is very good at, he'll get up first thing and he'll do some of the drop-offs if he can get them done before work and things like that. So we're trying to find our own balance, but it is interesting how it always just falls to the mums. And even out with the sort of physical like drop-offs and pickups, things like trying to coordinate play dates for your kid, or doing all of the mum admin, like for nursery payments and school forms and birthday presents and all of these things. Like for some reason that seems to fall on the mum in almost every household. And it is probably, like you say, we're in a patriarchal society. These are old-fashioned gender roles that even when women started working didn't really disappear. And it's this whole, well, you can have it all, but actually having it all means that we're now juggling like 2 full-time jobs. It's just crazy.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, the whole phrase "you can have it all," it just doesn't exist. I think it's Michelle Obama, isn't it? That's like, you can have it all, but not at the same time. And I do agree with that. And also, because I've talked about this on my LinkedIn about having it all, and I think a lot of people are like, I don't want it all. Like, take it back. I don't bloody want it. Like, fair enough, fair enough. Neither do I. But you're right. Like you said, what you've navigated with your husband, you have to figure out what works for you and play to your strengths. Like, I am absolute dog shit at research. Like, I cannot pay bills and do research into like various providers and set up direct debit. It's so boring. So like that's very firmly in Robbie's domain, but I'm I'm the social chair. I'm like, right, party's done, play date's done, birthday presents done. I'm all about the social side. You can go and sit in a corner and not talk to anyone. I'll be yabbering away to whoever wants to chat to me, and like, that's me. But you need to pay, yeah, the nursery fees, and you need to, if they've like run out of if they've grown out of the trainers and stuff, you've got to do the research to find what's on sale so we can get it, because otherwise I'm just going to buy whatever pair I can find within 5 minutes on Google, even if it's 60 quid, because I cannot be asked. But maybe that's just down to time as well. Like, I do not have I prioritize where I put my time, and searching through various websites for who's got a trainer on sale, because in fairness, paying £60 for a 3-year-old's shoe footwear is ridiculous. But I just don't have the time or the care to do it. And maybe he does, or he values that more. I don't know. He just likes research. But yeah, I think you find your kind of where you're at with each other, or at least I hope you do. I hope you do. But it's still just never equal. And that's hard to do. But then equally, so you've got 2 girls, right? I've got 2 boys. So I'm really conscious that I just don't want them to be dicks, I just don't want them to be dicks. And so I do want them to be able to take responsibility. I do want them to be able to just see a plate on the side and pick it up and take it and put it in a dishwasher. Like, just see it and do it. See it and do it. And I'm trying to like cultivate that from an early age, because that is the kind of stuff that just falls through the gaps. But it's all those tiny things, and then it adds up and it adds up and it adds up and it adds up, so that when they're adults, well, when they're if they decide to have children and that's what they want to do, I hope that they will be even more supportive and more able to take on a much more shared role within the house and childcare, because they will have been conditioned by me from an early age to do that. Because I just think, I mean, I think it's important for them anyway to grow up into independent adults, but just for the human race of being a female on the other side of it, the expectation on men and women is different. So I'm trying to close that gap a bit, in the same way that you're probably going to have conversations with your daughters about sort of being not too into beauty standards and kind of self-esteem and consent and all of that. I'll probably be having similar conversations with a different slant, and it's just about trying to teach them that for the future and the hope of better.
Yeah, no, I think that's such a good point. And I think I'm kind of conscious of that. So, for example, I have sort of found a little niche for myself with the other side of my business, which is sort of wedding and proposal and family photography, but with quite an alternative spin on it. And I found this niche for myself of shooting these really adventurous, like proposals and couple shoots. But what that means is it means traveling up to the Isle of Skye or to Glencoe, or, earlier this week I was over on the Isle of Iona. And that means that I have to be away from home for at least 1 and sometimes 2 overnights. And as much as I was kind of excited about that, I love the idea of doing a bit of traveling on my own. And obviously shooting in these beautiful places is really great for like the creative part of it. But it means that there's a lot of coordination to be done at home and a lot of extra responsibility for my husband to then figure out, all of the parenting stuff along with his workload and everything. And I was feeling really guilty about that. Like, before I kind of decided to take any of this stuff on, I was feeling, oh, I don't know if I should do this. And, my older daughter was being like, Mom, I don't want you to go, and all of these things. And in fairness to my husband, he was the one who was like, no, you need to do this. Like, you're excited about it. You've won this work. Like, this is cool. You need to go for it. And at the end of the day, as much as I might feel a little bit guilty about all the extra stuff he has to do, or about the girls missing me while I'm away, those girls are seeing that if their mom wants to go off and do something cool and grow her business and do these amazing things, she can do it, and dad can be here to man the fort. And, when I started to look at it that way, I thought, actually, that's quite a good thing. And people ask me quite often, like, oh, don't you hate working on the weekend? Because obviously a big part of my job entails working at least 1 day on the weekend. And I have scaled that back, once my business got to a point where I could turn work away. But to be honest, I think it's quite nice for Paul to get a day with the girls all to himself, and he likes it too. And it's reframing all of this stuff. Like, it shouldn't always be on the mums to be there every weekend or to be there every bedtime, or it's okay for us to also be excited about these projects and go away and leave somebody else to deal with the responsibility. And I want my girls to see that, so that, like you say, if they grow up and they want to become parents, or even just if they want a partner, that they know that they don't have to fall into this role where everything falls on them and their second priority.
Yeah. Oh, I totally agree. I think it's really important to have something that's yours. So oh, humble brag here. I go to the gym. I actually work out, guys. I do that three, sometimes even four times a week in a morning. And guess what? To make it even more sickening, I do it at a 6 a.m. class. So
Oh, I
everybody
can't
can
do
hate
that.
me. Everybody can hate me for all of those words I've just said. But again, to your point, like the boys know that that's what I do. When I come back, it's like 7:10 and like pad down the stairs and I'll like sort out breakfast and they're all like, Mammy, you've been to the gym. And I'm like, yeah, because I want them to grow up like knowing that's kind of a healthy way to live. But that there's other things I'd like to do in the future that I've kind of earmarked for when they're a bit older to have that's mine, because actually growing up and and it's only really kind of realized it while you were talking, my mum and dad, they were both teachers, so it was quite I guess traditional jobs and relatively traditional upbringing, and that my mum did most of the cooking, my dad did most of the DIY, that kind of thing. But I don't actually really remember my mum having anything that was hers. I mean, she would go out with her friends and stuff, and since she's been retired, she's absolutely bloody loving life and having a great old time. But growing up, I don't remember her, going to the gym. Like, it didn't quite exist in that same way, I guess, that it does now. But or having a book club or having something that was hers. She was either at work or with us as a family. I mean, occasionally, yeah, she'd go to the cinema with a friend or something like that, but there wasn't anything else. And actually, when you think of it that way, yeah, it's really good for your kids to see you have something else outside of the home and work that is mentally and maybe physically good for you and is challenging you. And even sort of doing work that is a bit different, like they're seeing something, they're seeing you strive for something, and I think that's a good lesson.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say about, specifically about the gym, because that's kind of been my thing as well. I started when Charlotte was a baby working out with a PT that I could bring Charlotte to. And then I've always just kind of stuck with it. But only very recently, in the last year or so, have I done workouts at times when I should have, and I say that in air quotes, been at home, because I was always kind of trying to fit it into my work day. And then I'd be like, oh, well, I took 2 hours out of my day to go to the gym. So now I have to make up those 2 hours at night, and like getting stuck in that kind of cycle. And now, usually 2 evenings a week at about 7 o'clock, I'm just like, right, that's me. I'm going to the gym. I'm the opposite of you. I'm a night owl, not a morning person. I cannot get up to go for 6 o'clock. So that's what I do. And in fairness, my husband normally kind of deals with the bedtime stuff anyways, but it means that Charlotte, like my older one, is always seeing me go out the door. And you're right, it's doing something healthy, it's doing something for me. I talk to her about it and I'm very careful. And this is probably again with the girl thing, but I'm very careful that it's not about weight loss, that it's about, I like how I feel when I feel strong. I like that I'm getting stronger. It's a stress relief. And we talk about it in that way because I want her to see it that way and to see me having this thing that I'm excited about. And I same in my household. I don't remember my mom ever going out and doing anything that was just for her. My dad always played, so Canadian, my dad played ice hockey. So he would always go out and play ice hockey with his friends. Once we were a bit older, that was like a once a week thing on a Saturday morning. But in fairness, yeah, I don't think either of my parents really had a hobby or a club or a thing that they did regularly. And I think it's good for our kids to know that as much as our worlds do very much revolve around them, that we are still our own people. And I think having things like the gym or a book club, like you said, or, any sort of hobby or interest out with work and parenting responsibilities it makes you feel more like you again.
Yes, yes,
Because that
massively.
loss of identity or change of identity that comes with motherhood, I think actually I found that to be the most difficult part of it, is figuring out like, who am I now? Like, I'm still me and I'm still really excited about my work and I love spending time with my friends and I love traveling and I'm a mom, but like, what things do I actually like to do for myself? If I had a free afternoon, how would I want to spend it? And it actually took me a good few years to get back to a point where I gave myself time and space to explore that.
Yeah, and without guilt as well. I think that's the other thing. Even if you do something for yourself, you kind of there's something in the back of your head. And I'm not saying anybody says this to you. It's something you do to yourself that you're like, oh, I shouldn't really be doing this, or hurry up, rush through it or get home or whatever it is. And yeah, it's just such a funny time. And I think it does take years to kind of get yourself and actually, I'm not going to use the term back because I don't think you do go back. I really think you do change the person. I think you develop and like I think I'm better now. I think like I'm a better person than I was because having kids, it really knocks some corners off you, and you do have to be more patient and more empathetic. I think you're always kind of self-reflecting a bit because if if you're parenting, you might be looking at how you're doing it and don't you've kind of looked back on your own childhood and how you are now. And again, I talk about this in other instances, is that so I was born in the mid-80s, so I'm like a 90s child. There was no validating of emotions in the 90s. Like you just got on with it. And that has left me a rather stunted emotional being. In that I do find it hard as a 40-year-old woman, to recognize what my emotions are and to kind of deal with them and stuff. And so now, there is this whole change and shift in parenting that I see with lots of my peers as well, with that, we really do make sure their emotions are validated and try and kind of work out sort of maybe what's going on rather than thinking that the behavior is wrong. It's kind of like they're acting out on something else. So with my oldest, it's often he's quite structured, so it's often if something doesn't quite happen how he expects it to happen, that can be quite hard for him to take and get quite upset about it. But actually when you point out that's the reason, he seems to sort of calm down because I think he's felt understood and validated. I mean, I'm saying this, I don't want to give out any parenting advice, like I've got none to give. My youngest lives on fish fingers. But like I think that's a whole sort of part of figuring out who you are, because you're constantly maybe like self-reflecting, and then you're growing and you're wanting to sort of teach them, I don't know, maybe right the wrongs. I mean, we grew up with did you in Canada, did you have it, the Special K diet? Oh my God, eat 2 bowls of cereal. And there's a comedian who I love called Helen Bauer who does a great little skit on it about the whole, like, that's what we all fell for and we all believe. But again, even with the boys, when I go to gym, I don't talk about my weight. If I eat a slightly different meal to them, I don't talk about the fact that I'm on a calorie deficit at the moment. I talk about it, about being healthy and about being strong and about being fit. And I use those terms because I grew up with my mum, and she was, my mum is great. My mum was not in my ear, you shouldn't eat that, a lifetime on the hips, blah, 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 blah. But I was conscious that my mum was regularly on a diet
Yeah.
because I think that's how a lot of people grew up. And you do end up with your own kind of issues around food and, being a secret eater or binging and stuff like that. And that you want to have a healthier way for your own kids because you've looked back at your childhood and gone, oh, well, maybe we could do this a little bit differently. And again, that's all part of matrescence, and it goes through these different seasons of this really like intense period when you're first a mum, and then you start to find yourself again and you're figuring it out in those sort of preschool toddler years. When I talk to people, I'm always fascinated about what matrescence means when they leave home, because you've built so much of your identity up as a mum. And then now, I mean, of course, you're still a mum, but they've gone. So where does that leave your identity then? And I don't know that. There's no research on that. And I'm not at that point yet, but I'm always so fascinated. What does that part of matrescence looks like? But it all just feeds into this same thing that particularly as women, I feel we're constantly evolving and constantly like thinking about how to be better, because our standards and society standards are so high.
Yeah, that's really interesting, especially what you were saying, about, yeah, what happens as the kids go through these different phases, and probably even the phase when they hit their teenage years. And they obviously still need you, but in such a different way where it becomes so less hands-on. And Yeah, so you are just constantly adapting. And I think one thing that I found quite difficult, so, I think talking about the adaptation of going back into work, whether that's like a sort of structured role or self-employment, or even deciding to start a business after having a child because you want that flexibility and trying to figure out, I'm almost like shudder to say this work-life balance term because, I sometimes I'm starting to think more and more it's not even possible. But I think I found shifting back into work actually less difficult than the shifts that have to take place after that as your business changes or grows, or you add something else into the realm of what you do. And it's like this constant readjustment of like, how much work is too much and how can I structure my work around the needs of my family and all of these things. And it feels like a constant struggle. And every time you figure out something that kind of fits, then everything shifts again.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I totally agree. I totally agree. I mean, things do change, and yeah, I think you do just have to adapt. And I think you, by and large, yeah, I think women tend to do more of the adapting. And it's interesting what you said about all the changes you have to make, because when I was talking about, mentioned about the brain, the baby brain, again, this information is really new, but the studies have shown that women's brains, if they have children, they tend to have better memory recall at later stages in life because they've continued to adapt to the needs of the children throughout their years. So their cognitive sort of recall of things is better because they're constantly almost like having to be on their toes, having to think on their feet, having to come up with something. And again, this is from a really small study and it's really sort of new, but it was even making the point that the more children you have, then your memory recall in later life is even better because you've had to do so much of that. And I think that plays into the whole evolution and adaptation that you find you have to go through. And then even as women, if you think about it, just like the cycle of our life, like menstruation and then and then matrescence if you have children, and then menopause, like it's a constant cycle. Whereas with blokes, it's just not really the same. And they do go through matrescence, like, there is a thing they go through. There is a transformation to fatherhood. It does have an impact on their hormones. And there is something, it is not as profound, it is not as big a shift, but it's there. And obviously they go through adolescence as well, but there's just not as many cycles of change. They don't have like a monthly cycle to deal with where, some days you are just starving, absolutely starving, and it's all to do with your period, or you're just annoyed and you're kind of a little bit. I know there's lots of people, I think, that talk more about hormones and how that can affect you in day-to-day life and in the gym and in work and all of that, but you are a little bit of a slave to it because it really can just push you, one way or another. And if you are quite irritated and you've got children, they, believe me, they can irritate you more, and you've got to like bite it back because you've got to know that the irritation is with whatever is going on with you and not the fact that they just will not put on their shoes. You just kind of have to like deal with that and make it a game. Oh, there's a shoe monster, put your shoes on. It's just a glimpse into my morning there.
No, you're so right though. And that's really interesting about the research. It does make sense, like because we do have to adapt constantly, that, that is going to, as much as that adds difficulties at the time, that is going to maybe provide some benefit in the future years, which is good. Because I think one of the things that a lot of people struggle with is focus. And, trying to find focus. And I don't know how much that sort of plays into the way that your brain changes, and maybe you can speak a little bit to that, but I think it is, I've definitely found that like my focus and the baby brain and stuff, I don't know that it's gotten massively better, even though my youngest is 2.5. And things have definitely changed. I mean, you can't argue with it.
No, definitely. I mean, I don't know about focus. I mean, it does say apparently makes you more efficient. And I think you do use the blocks of time you have probably more efficiently than somebody else, who maybe has all the time in the world. So, but I don't know in terms of focus, because equally then you've got a lot of other things going in your head. So it might be that you just have to have coping mechanisms for that. Like I will put my phone in a different room if I have got, stuff to do, because it's so easy for me to just reach for it and be like, oh, just have a, and our phones are like the devil. Like more and more I'm like disliking the whole phone social media stuff, but I also use it so much for work, really. So if I'm out and about and I'm looking at my phone, it often is a work thing. It's not like I'm just having a jolly on social media. I am working, because I don't even really like social media. I don't use it for personal use because I think it's toxic and awful. And I just don't also think anyone would really be that interested in my life. Like it's really quite dull. So I don't do that, but I do find a lot of perspective and I guess sort of solidarity in social media when you look at some of the stuff that people are sharing, but it still has to be done on like a time limit, because otherwise you can come off it and it makes me feel low. So like I have to put it away, but that's like a focus thing. So I'm like, if I'm doing something at work, I'm like, right, phone is in the other room. Hopefully nursery won't call. And just kind of hope for the best and go with that. Maybe check it again 2 hours later. But I think focus is hard. I think you have to block out your time when you have it.
Yeah, that's something I've really been working on is sort of, I guess, first tracking how I was actually spending my time. And as you say, trying to find the most effective way to use the blocks of time that I have, because often, it kind of depends on the day and which days my youngest is in nursery and things like that. But often I'll have like maybe only a block of 2 or 3 hours to work before I have to run and do something for the kids. Whereas, if I was working in a traditional job, I would potentially have 8 hours, maybe with some meetings and things in between. And it is finding out which tasks I can do best in the shorter periods of time and which things I can be interrupted in. And it just feels like this constant um like trial and error, really. And maybe that's just how it will always be. I keep thinking I'm going to hit this magical point where I'm going to figure it all out, but realistically, I don't know if that exists.
Oh, I'm glad you said that, because I keep waiting for that as well. I keep waiting for like, oh, it's all going to slot into a routine at some point. Like when my youngest goes to school, yeah, that'll be fine. But then I'm like, oh no, but the days are shorter. But I do know what you mean. There's almost like an added mental thing of like, right, this is my to-do list. And then out of that, I can do like this, and this in like a short burst, or if I get interrupted, it doesn't matter. But this is the thing I need to get my head down. So I need to make sure I've got 2 hours or whatever properly carved out to do it. And then sometimes you also just have to be in the right headspace. So I think you said like you're more of a night owl. My husband is as well, and he can actually work quite well in an evening, and I can't. Like my brain is done. And that doesn't matter whether I've worked during the day or whether I've had the kids during the day. Possibly worse if I've had the kids during the day, to be honest. And they're in bed. The oldest is probably in bed by about 8 o'clock now, and I'm like, get my trashy telly on. I want to watch Fortune Hotel, which is what I'm into at the moment, and Double the Money and Celebs Go Dating and Married at First Sight. I just put that in front of my eyes and let me drink it in, because I can't. I can't. I've got nothing left. I've got nothing left. Whereas he can carve out that time to do it, but I know that anything I did then just wouldn't really be very beneficial, and I might as well just watch reality TV.
But that's okay. And I think, so much of what we've spoken about already, I think could be kind of tailored back into like tips or advice, from people who have been there before and are still very much living it. But that's definitely one of the main things that I've taken from all of this, is to try and push aside the rules and what everybody else says and figure out what works for you. So for you to get that gym time in, that means you have to get up early and then you get your work done during the day. And then at the end of the night, you need that downtime. I'm probably the opposite schedule, where I'm like slower to get up. And I usually, if I am going to the gym, it'll either be like after the kids are sort of nursery at school, or I'll go in the evening, and then I fit my work in around that. But it's so easy to get caught up in one of my friends who has, again, a very traditional job is like, oh, I'd never work in the evening. I hate working in the evening. That's awful. And I'm like, but it's not awful for me because I have the flexibility to go to the gym during the day or whatever. So it is kind of trying to tune out all of that comparison and all of these rules that we've been taught are like the only way that you can structure your life. and figuring out what works for us, and also, being able to adapt that, because it is going to change at different stages with your kids' needs and your business needs or your career needs. um and sticking to that. And I think, I don't know, I'm maybe putting you on the spot a little bit here. I think you've already shared quite a lot of advice as to like how to deal not only with that transition into motherhood, but also with like, as that evolves, how to continue to give yourself some space to explore that and how that feels and how you can best sort of reshape your life around it. But I'm wondering if you have any sort of general tips or bits of advice for people that are maybe going into this phase. Where can they start? Where, what kind of places are good to look for resources? Obviously yourself is a great place to start, but where's a good kind of place to start this journey?
Do you mean from like a mental health perspective or from a work perspective?
I think more from like a personal mental health perspective, I would say.
I think, I mean, yes, obviously me, come to me. But I think there's a few things that I think people should do. One of them is ignore the line that says you can't plan for having a child. Oh, you'll never be prepared for having a baby. Like, just ignore that narrative, because there are things you can do. And I'm not saying you'll know what it feels like after you have a kid, but there are things you can do to then make that transition easier. So one of them is a postnatal plan. Like, that's really key. We don't do them in the UK. But again, back to my nerdy studies, there was a study done in 2020 by an academic nurse, and she concluded that if you have a postnatal plan, you are less likely to experience maternal distress and postnatal disorders. Like, it's that cut and dry, because you've done the thinking beforehand. You've thought of various scenarios. You've decided how you're going to deal with visitors and how you're going to manage your mental health and what you may be going to do about feeding or what you can do about sleep and what the conversations you're going to have with your partner. And the problem with the postnatal plan is, if it's your first time, you don't know what you don't know. So you don't know what to put on it. It seems really overwhelming. How can you start? Which is why, shameless plug, I have one within like the packs that I sell, because I think it's really important to have a template, and then you're just filling in the answers. But even if not, like, at least try and have a look online. There might be some like American sites, because they tend to do it more there, that, could help, or at least give you a starter. But I think that's really important, because if anything, it just starts you thinking. And don't think that it will be okay, which is such a negative message. And I feel awful kind of for saying that. And I'm trying to make it a realistic message, but there's no point going in saying, oh, I'll be fine. I think I'll be all right. Because honestly, you don't know. And I hope everybody will. But let's look at the stats, let's look at the stories, and let's say that, chances are there might be something that crops up, whether that's physical, whether that's mental. So the more conversations and planning you can do beforehand to find where those sources of support are and how you're going to tackle it as a partnership, then the better. And I think ask for people's stories and experiences and perspectives, just so you can have like a wide range. Because do you know what? Some people will have a really great birth story, and you should hear those stories. Like, it's really important to hear those positive stories. But other people might not. And then people don't want to scare you. But equally, the more knowledge you have, then the better you can be prepared. So I think it is about knowledge being power, and not blindly accepting what you're given. And I say this with a great deal of love for the NHS. Having a free healthcare service is absolutely amazing, and I'm very thankful for that. But they will give you what they give you. They will give you the information that they have available in leaflet form or whatever. There is a lot out there, and it's not necessarily covered. And I think now we're in a position in society when you have to do the work. You have to do the work yourself. In the same way that you would prep for a job interview, you have to do the work yourself. You have to take the responsibility. And I hope that by taking the responsibility and doing the work to look into the type of birth you would like and the type of postnatal experience you would like, and not feeling ashamed for paying for help. If you've got the money, bloody throw your money at it. And if you don't have the money, I'm sorry. Because unfortunately, if that's where we've ended up as a society, that's pretty shit. But if you do have the money, throw your money at a postnatal doula, throw your money at lactation consultant if you really want to breastfeed, throw your money at the convenience of a Tommy Tippy formula bottle thing, which we had, which was amazing, especially at night. Like
We
just
had one too.
throw, oh my God, it was so good. And I'm not, this is not a sponsor, this is not an ad, as if I was say if I was any kind of influencer. Genuinely a really good thing. Throw your money at anything that would make your life a little bit easier and convenient. And find people and realize that anybody you spend time with as a new mum, doesn't matter if you just need someone to talk to for an hour. They do not have to be your best friend. I think there's a bit of a rhetoric about mum friends or school mums or this clique and that clique. And honestly, it's just have adult conversation for an hour. If that friendship continues, fantastic. That's great. That's lovely for both of you. But if it is literally just to be able to get out of the house, just to sit opposite somebody and either get their perspective or just talk about some rubbish you're watching on telly, that will do wonders for your mental health. So it's just trying to look at all those pieces of the puzzle and I guess maybe understanding who you are, what kind of person you are. Like if you're quite a go with the flow person, you might find the shift potentially a bit easier because you're a bit more relaxed about things. But if you're a bit more like me, a bit uptight, a bit type A, wishing I could be all like cool and flowy and breezy, then you might find it harder because you might find that lack of control really difficult. So I think it's almost like a bit of, God dare I say it without sounding wanky, but a bit of like self-reflection beforehand, if you can, to kind of help you. I just think there's having a baby is really easy to almost sleepwalk into. I know I did. I was like, oh yeah, I like to have a family. Yeah, yeah, we'll have a baby. Okay, yeah, that's fine. And I didn't do the work. I didn't do the work. And to be fair, there was no one really guiding me to do the work. So I'm not going to take all the blame, but I didn't do the work. And also we turned up 5 weeks early. So our NCT classes were cut short. So again, still not taking all the blame, but I didn't do the work. And I didn't do the work second time because we ended up in lockdown. There was sort of nothing there. And yeah, I think, I mean, sorry, this is a really long answer to quite a short question, but I think it is just do the work, prepare yourself as much as possible and prepare for outcomes that might be difficult because actually, just the act of preparing yourself, again, according to studies, the act of preparing yourself is better for your well-being because you're already sort of taking that control and empowering yourself. So, yeah, preparation, I sound a bit like a scout, but yeah, preparation.
That's great advice though, because it does, you know, what you said there at the end about how it's almost like you get to regain a bit of control. Like when you are planning to have a baby, like planning itself as a word or as a term is like a joke, right? Because you can plan as best that you can and you don't know what's going to happen. But preparing yourself and, you know, like you say, look at a mix of stories. Don't only read bad stories. Of course, it's great to have the good ones too, but prepare yourself for the different things that could happen, and that, you know, educating yourself and finding that support network around you. I think that's brilliant advice because you're right, it's really easy to sleepwalk into it and just go, ah, we'll figure it out. And you will, but why not make it a little easier on yourself and sort of have those resources in place, have that education in place so that if you need it, it's there. I think that's great advice. And I know obviously your now what are they? Are they postnatal packs? No,
Well,
prenatal pack.
they're actually antenatal packs because the idea is that they've got postnatal plans and feeding plans in them. So, read them during pregnancy, fill them out during pregnancy, but then we kind of refer back to them when you're going through it because I think sometimes you can read things, particularly in pregnancy, feels quite surreal, but use the tools. And then when you're going through it, you might be like, I'm going to read back on matrescence or intrusive thoughts or how I feel about my partner because now it's clicking and making sense because I'm going through it. So that's kind of what it's about. Yeah.
And I mean, that's brilliant because then that sort of takes you through the planning and then also adds some sort of support and resources as you kind of enter that matrescence phase and those early kind of days of motherhood. But I also know that you have a lot of sort of brilliant resources and you share a lot of new information and really good perspective over on your Instagram. So I will put all of those notes in, I'll put all of those links into the show notes. But can you just tell us where to find you online? So for anybody who prefers the auditory thing, they can easily go check you out.
They can, yeah. So I'm at matrescence_club. And yeah, I share some stuff on Instagram. And then I've also have a free fortnightly newsletter, which talks about all kinds of things to do with motherhood and matrescence, and normally has a bit of swearing and a gif of a pop star, because that's how I roll.
I love it. You need a little bit of fun, I think, when you're talking about all of this heavy stuff. Was there anything else that we missed, Susie? I know I've kept you for ages already, but I think we've covered so much in one conversation. I feel like this should almost be a dual episode to fit all of this stuff in. But is there anything else that we kind of didn't touch upon that you wanted to bring up before I leave it here?
I don't think so, because I know what I'm like, and I go off on about a million tangents. I start talking about something and then it leads me to something else, and I probably really need to maybe get that looked at. But I've got loads of notes. I could talk about this for days, as I always can whenever I speak to people, but I think I've probably bombarded with enough. But yeah, if anyone ever wants to find out more, then they can just come and find me.
That's perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us and for yeah, for sharing your perspective a little bit about your business journey and just lots of things to think about and also lots of advice for people that are kind of entering into this time or already in the thick of this time and finding it really hard. So thanks a lot.
Thank you for having me.